Hello everyone, in today's video I'll be doing this tiered ruffle dress made from something you'd normally find at the thrift store. Why? Because, well, they're a bit dated. What am I talking about? Bed skirts, also known as dos ruffles. That's right, this dress is made entirely from a bed skirt. I was inspired by this one on a recent thrifting trip, so here's what I did. To start, I needed a few measurements. Since the dress would be sleeveless, to find the length, I placed a strip across my chest where the elastic would sit, then from there I measured down to my ankle, which came out to be 50 inches. I almost forgot about this one, but what I call the center length is from the elastic down the center front to your waist. This is needed for the elastic waist to make the dress more flattering. For the hip, in case you're unsure, is the fullest part of your hip where your buttocks protrudes the most. As for the ruffles, I went ahead and removed all the panels from the skirt, leaving an inch above them. I then measured the length, which was roughly 15 inches. Having all my measurements, it was time to do the math. Since my dress length was 50 with the bottom ruffles attached and my ruffles being 15, to find the length of the base, I deducted the ruffle length from the length of the dress. As for the width at the neck, I used my hip measurements to ensure I could get in the dress since it would be a pull-on style. For the hem, I added 8 inches to give it a subtle A-line so I could move around without the need for a split. Using your measurements, calculate the yardage for the straps, top and bottom tiers, and the base. Using mine, for example, if I used fabric by the yard, rounded off, I'll need 5 yards. This is based on a 45-inch width fabric. Having figured that out, I took the rest of the bed skirt and folded a piece in half. With all my measurements divided in half as well, I made all my markings, then cut 2. Taking the 2 halves, I joined them at the sides. Here's the base all ready to go. Now to figure out how many ruffle tiers I needed and the spacing between them. After my calculations, I needed 4 in total. This is where the center length comes in. It's used for the spacing between the top 2 tiers. For the other 2 tiers, considering my ruffles are 15 inches, I spaced them 12 inches apart so they would overlap. I then started with the bottom tier and worked my way up. Here's how. This one was pretty straightforward. I didn't need the extra inch at the top, so for this one I removed it. Taking one end of the ruffles, I pinned it ½ inch away from the side seams with right sides facing. I then continued pinning until I was back to the side seam. Once there, I made sure everything was laying nicely before removing the excess. I then quickly pinned it and sewed everything in place. Personally, I prefer to sew the ruffles on before closing the side. Okay, so I jumped a little ahead here because this one will be attached in the same way. Like the illustration, I measured and marked 12 inches from the top of the last tier upwards. Now to attach the tier, I first folded the 1 inch strip in half and pressed. Again, with approximately ½ inch hanging from the side seam, I placed the fold along the marked line and pinned. Once back to the side seam, I laid everything out nice and flat before removing the excess. Afterwards, I turned the ends over, right sides facing, and pinned. I then sewed the ruffles in place. To do that, I sewed 2 rows of stitching on both sides of the strip to create a channel for the 1/4 inch elastic. For that reason, I left a section of the side seam open to insert it later on. But first, let's add the last tier. Before doing so, I turned the dress on the wrong side, then finished it in the same way I did the bottom tier. There was just one more thing to do before sewing, and that was to add straps. Taking a piece of the scrap, I removed the strip, then pressed. Afterwards, I made 2.5-inch marks along both sides for 4 straps. With my fabric being 30 inches wide, I used my yardstick to connect the dots. Once my straps are cut and ready to go, I folded it in half with right sides facing and sewed down the sides. Next, taking my safety pin, I hooked it onto the edge of the open end, then turned it into the strap and thread it through. It can be a little tricky to start. Before attaching them, I closed one of the ends. Okay, so to attach the straps, I decided on the placements, then sandwiched them between the dress and the ruffles at the seam. Before I could insert the 1/2-inch elastic at the neck, I first had to sew a channel. So I sewed 5/8 inch from the top, leaving a small opening for the elastic. Here it is already inserted with the small opening now left to close. At this point, I also inserted the 1/4-inch elastic at the waist. I then quickly pinned it and tried it on before finishing. This brings us to our final step. This is necessary because the key to pulling off this look without looking frumpy is to define your waist. Now, while we already have the elastic waist in place to help, it's not doing much if it's mostly hidden underneath the top tier. Which is why I shortened the hem after fitting and pinning to make sure I was happy with the length. And that was it. That wraps up today's video. I hope you're able to follow along. If so, give it a big thumbs up. If you're interested in any of the supplies I use, they're all listed below. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure to follow me along on the gram for a glimpse of my upcoming video, and I'll see you next time. Bye!